this is the right database. Let's look at some statistics. This is heads up. So I close that right away because I don't want to see heads up tables. Like I said earlier, you know, your stats mean different things depending on whether there's well, your pre-flop stats mean different things primarily if there's, you know, two people at the table or 6 people at the table. So I just want to make sure we get, you know, a table with 6 people at it. So I know I can have a frame of reference for the numbers we're looking at, right? Here we go. Make sure that's up on the screen and readable. So here's an example of how far you can go, right? This is the, I haven't been using this HUD on black chip poker. I use this HUD in my lessons. This is my Uber HUD, I call it, for, I can really, well, and if I'm sitting at the poker table, in my usual game, the 200 no limit game, I will use this and I can break someone's, I can profile players, you know, in an instant and spot all kinds of leaks with the color coding and everything else. And I also use this in my lessons for the same reason, because I can, if I'll have my client send me their last 50,000, 100,000 hands, we'll pop it in here and very quickly we can see, you know, where the leaks are in their game. But let's jump over to the HUD class and have a look at what, see what there is to see. So why don't we stop for a moment and let me show you some of these settings, because if you're following along in your storybook and you're putting some of this stuff in your HUD, yours may not look like mine, and it's going to be because of the settings. Relationship between raise first in and VPIP. Good question. So RFI is raise first in, and VPIP is voluntarily put money in the pot. So VPIP is, you know, your huge stat that tells you simply the percentage of hands someone's playing. Raise first in is closer to pre-flop raise because it's describing, you know, someone's raising characteristics, but it's not the same. Raise first in is really what you use when you're looking at positional stats. So raise first in, like for me in my HUD, I have raise first in early position, raise first in middle, cutoff, button, small blind. We looked at that for you, Antiquity, in our lesson. So that's nice if, for example, someone opens under the gun. Well, let's say they open on in middle position, and you're sitting there with ace 10 offsuit. Let's say ace 10 suited in the cutoff, and you're trying to figure out whether you should call, right? Well, they opened in middle position, so you would go, if you had, say, 1,000 hands, you would go right to their middle position raise first in. Now, it's different than middle position pre-flop raise. You can dig up positional pre-flop raises, and we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but it's a good question. So I'll say this, use VPIP and pre-flop raise to start. We're going to talk about those right now. You can add positional raise first in once you start getting 1,000 hands. That's like in your tier 2 or tier 3 level of stats. Once you start getting thousands of hands on your opponent, stick in the positional raise first in, not the pre-flop raise positional stats, but the raise first in positional stats. So that's all I'm going to say about that for now, but good question. Okay, so for the settings, you know, you can go to stat appearance, and now you get a similar, you know, kind of list of all your stats. And what's cool about this is you can go into each of these, and you saw how my HUD looked a bit like a Christmas tree. You can go into each of these and set thresholds for the stat to change colors. Now let me show you a trick. Let's go right in here. Name, oh, here's something. We'll use name as, I think name is the only one, since it's the only one I didn't delete. Name is the only one, I think, that is changing color. And you can do things like have it turn green when they're a fish, though I look at it and it's always red. I say, okay, let's see if it changes. Okay, now it's always yellow. Okay, anyway, I'm just not confident that's working because I'm looking up at this fish, right? And technically it should be, he should be green because he's over 20. So I'm not sure this works all that well. You can color code all the numbers, but I think it's because, you know, a number doesn't, the value for this stat are letters. So there's no way to, add numerical thresholds on a field that has letters for its value, right? That doesn't make any sense. So what I do is, like, for the less, for the stuff that, this gets into like visual design, you want to suppress some things that, you're not going to look at so much. See how this turned gray? So I just make that gray. Hands, it's the same thing, it's just, I'd rather have this gray, because I'm not gonna, you can do things with hands where you set thresholds and make like, you can make, as soon as, I've done this before, where if I have less than, most people, if I've say got thousands and thousands of hands, then I'll have it be gray, but I'll have it turn red if I have less than 100 hands. So I really notice when I don't just, I'm blasting along at Zoom or Zone or something, and I don't accidentally make a decision when I don't have any hands on someone. Or if you have, if you only have 10 to 100 hands on every player, then you could do the opposite. You could have it pop to a different color when you've got thousands of hands, because you're like, all right, now I can dig into all the deep stats. I think that the name stats are for the big blinds they have for the color codes. Oh, that's interesting. That's a pro tip. So then what he's suggesting, I think, is that these numbers are sensitive to big blinds, so you could color code their name based on how many big blinds they have. That's interesting. I'd have to test that, play with it. I like that idea. So that's a bit on the color codes. I'm not going to go too much further into that right now. Another thing you can do, which is wise for starting out, is if you come over to General Settings, you can turn on Show Abbreviations, and it's kind of like training wheels, right? It's not a bad idea to start out with this, because when you first throw all these new numbers down, you're not going to know what's what. So turn on those. I'd suggest turning on those Show Abbreviations, and then you can come into each of these and you can control the abbreviation right here, this abbreviation thing. So hands, H for hands, VPIP. I also like to keep these short. Preflop raise, you can just do PF, like try to get everything down to 2 letters. 3-bet, CCR, not credence. CC is fine. Aggression percentage, just ag, and CBet, sure. There we go. So we got it all trimmed down nice and tight. Okay. So there we go. We've got a basic HUD. We've thrown in some abbreviations. Let me see if there's any other general settings. You can control percentage, like decimals here. Yeah, you can throw a decimal on 3-bet, because sometimes you want 2 significant digits, and if that value is always a single digit, then there's something meaningful between a 4.5 and a 5, or a 7.5 and an 8. Like at the beginning, it's probably not a big difference, but eventually you might want that granularity. All the other ones, though, where they're often 2 digits, don't worry about the decimals. Minimum samples is a good one. You could do something like 10 here for some of them, but then again, like, you can also use it to at 0, because I want to know if that guy's played his first 3 hands or not. So I don't know. There's 2 schools of thought here, and I think I would probably suggest just keeping it at 0. So every data point is meaningful if you go into this sort of Bayesian philosophy. Okay. Dim for sample size, that's another cool one. At the beginning, I'd leave that off because everything will be dim, but over time, when you get lots and lots of stats, and you do have that scenario where there's one guy without stats or few stats, all the colors will get more dim, and that's a visual indicator that that player is, you don't have enough hands on that player. Display for hero, I turn this off a lot because I just find it distracting. I don't need to know. I'll do all my own self-analysis later. Maybe sometimes if you've been a total maniac on one table versus the other 3, because when it shows your stats, it's going to show your individual table stats, whereas for everyone else, it tends to show their stats for all time. So you could use this if you kind of want to see if you've been out of line in a particular table or just getting lucky. So, you've had aces 3 times in a row, so you raise 3 times in a row, and your pre-flop raise is 100% on your new table. Maybe you want to remember that. That's a possibility, but if you've got a lot of stats on your screen, for me, it just gets distracting sometimes. So I usually keep that off. Display for opponents, of course you want that. You can control for each. Oh, I see. And yeah, so these exist for individual stats. You can change them for individual stats. If you go down to the general settings, you can actually hide the hero HUD for everything. You don't want to use session stats. You want to use stats for all time. The more info, the better. Show note icon, that's this guy. You can often take notes in the poker software, or in, like, if you're playing black chip poker, you can take notes in black chip, or you can take notes in Holdem Manager. And the note-taking system in Holdem Manager is actually pretty sophisticated. So I'd suggest at least trying it out. Keep that icon. The auto rate is kind of a nice little, again, a little training wheel thing, a little helper. It'll give you icons like this guy's a fish. So right from the start, this is awesome to have this running, because it'll give you some visual cues about what all these numbers mean, even if you haven't quite figured it out for yourself. Show Table HUD will show you some things like pre-flop raise for the table, VPIP for the table. If you're getting, if you've been at a table for 100 hands, this might be meaningful, but I usually keep it off and just use the lobby information, because the lobby will also tell you what are the current players per flop, that sort of thing. Stat padding, separators. This is, I have everything separated by slashes. If you use the abbreviations, then it doesn't use the separator. If you turn abbreviations off, once you get used to all your stats and want to sort of tighten it up and trim it down, then you can come in here and put the slash separator or dash or whatever you want. Statting it, padding's how roomy it is. Minimum hands, you can wait for 5 hands before it pops up on people. That's reasonable, but like I said, you can 2 hands is something meaningful. If you want to know if that fish played his last hand, his first hand, then you want to see 1. You want to see that. Overhang is how far off it'll go on the screen. Last hand winners. This is for previous hands played. Pots over 50 big blinds. So this is something that will show you. This helps you get at the replayer. So it is kind of nice having these things on. And it's best demonstrated, so don't worry about this for now. Mucked hands, HUD font, advanced settings. So that's that. I'm not going to get into all that stuff now. Let's groove with it, shall we? Okay. So now we've got a basic HUD. We've got VPIP, pre-flop raise. We kind of scan around the table here, as we do while we're playing, and we see a variety of hands on players, right? I've got, and that's kind of the first thing you should draw your eyes to. I've got 18 on this guy, 650 hands on this guy, 80, 42, 19. So bluffing every hand, who I recognize his name, I've got 650 hands because I've played a bunch of hands with him, relatively speaking. We've got a lot of hands on him. So for this guy, I can use all of these stats in my HUD, right? His C-bet's 85%, which is kind of high, but I can trust that number because I've got 650 hands. You notice over here for 18, this is turned to a dash because I don't have any data points on this guy or the first 18 hands. He's 67, which tells us he's probably a fish, right? He's 6% pre-flop raise. So the reason we don't have any data points on his C-bet is because he probably raised 1 time out of 18 for the 6% and everybody folded. Or maybe he got 3-bet. So then, he didn't have the opportunity to C-bet. So, for a few hands, a stat like C-bet is not going to be very helpful. Even if we come down to this 42 guy, I'm going to show you guys a trick here. This is something you should learn right away, even for you intermediate guys. You want to be practicing this. This is a lesson. This is probably applicable to all of you guys. If you mouse over, this goes for all these stats. If you move the mouse over, you'll get your pop-up, and now you get a whole sea of information. And one thing I'd encourage you to do is just practice first with the stats on your HUD, right? Once you get those down and you have a little break, in the action, sure, make these pop-ups come up, and then just use that empty time. For people that complain about, oh, I get bored, I have to play 8 tables. Well, I don't think you should ever get bored. You can play 1 table and just use your extra time to improve your play. Practice things, use the pop-ups and dig in here and push yourself to learn. So what I wanted to show you is I come in here and you see towards the top left of this window, there's a green number there that says CBET. And it says 99. I think you guys should be able to see this. And then there's a number in parentheses next to it. So that number is how many individual data points we have for this particular statistic. So CBET percentage is 99, or it's 100%. I set all my numbers to 2 digits, like the pre-flop raise was 0.6, and CBET it changes it to a setting you can make to 99, because I like to keep everything sort of orderly, and at 2 digits, yeah, it's 100%, but 99 just makes it so everything's 2 digits, and you can align things a little better that way. So there's 2 data points for this individual statistic, and that's not very much, right? That's, anyone could have happened to have had a good hand in two data points. So what I want to illustrate here is that we've got 42 total hands on this player, but only 2 individual data points for CBET. So it's pretty much worthless. For those first 100 hands, let's check this guy. We've got 80 up here, and for his CBET we've got 5. So he's CBET 4 out of 5, which tells us very little. Tells us something, but very little. Now let's switch to aggression percentage. This other number. We'll check for the 42. And you're going to see this one at the bottom left, the other green number. Notice that we've got 17 as our data points for this. So even though we've only got 42 hands, we've got far more data points for the aggression percentage, which is why I encourage you to start with this. And then let's see. We're going to go up to this guy, and we've got 26 for him. So we've got 26 data points for this guy. Let's look at our 650 guy. We've got 650 hands. His CBET, we've still only got 39 data points for the CBET, right? I said earlier, if you guys heard it, 50 is kind of what you're looking for in the parentheses. And just so you know, once you get over 100, the number in parentheses disappears. So we look down at the post-flop aggression there at 46, and there's no number in parentheses. So we can be totally confident in this number. He's over 100. By the way, 46 is a really high aggression percentage. Like your average player's in the 30s, so as soon as someone hits the 40s, they're a pretty aggressive player. So, and I know that to be true for this guy, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of you have played in this game, 25, and may even know bluffing every hand. Maybe you're even watching, but bluffing every hand is like I was coaching someone yesterday that plays with him that called him spewy. Like he's a bit of a spewy player. He's hyper aggressive. I think he's good. I think he's smart, but he probably goes a little too far with his aggression, which basically leaves him pretty exploitable. The way we would exploit this guy now that we know he's aggressive is we just we catch him bluffing a lot. We trap him, right? Some hands that you might normally bet on the flop return because they're value hands, maybe not your best hands, but your more mediocre hands. Instead of betting, you turn them into check calls, right? You let him, you gain more value from a player like this by allowing him to bluff. So that's basically the idea. Okay, questions so far on this? Any questions? I'm going to do this. This is a pretty dense session today. So I might slip in a few more breaks, also to give my voice a rest because it's constantly talking. I'm going to say back in 2 minutes. I'm going to get some more water, let you guys ruminate, and think about your questions because, I've already blasted through a bunch of stuff here, and I want to hear some questions from you guys. So feel free to start tossing them out, and I'll be back in just 2 minutes. All right, there you go. Mr. Allen's got a question for me. Great. Um, Ooh, and you're even jumping ahead in your storybook. Um, so before I get to your question, I will indeed answer it. I was just chatting with my wife too. She wasn't due back for another hour. She went diving today, but she apparently the place they went diving was um, very close to us as opposed to very far away. So she's back. And okay, not that you guys care too much about that, but I do. So here we go. I'm just gonna update the title to this because I realized I hadn't updated my title. Um, we're gonna. It's no longer. There is some free coaching that's being given away via my poker challenge, which my bot so graciously mentioned a bit earlier in the chat. But I'm just going to say update the title to be more accurate, which is learn to use the Poker HUD and statistics live lesson right now. Okay, there we go. That's more accurate. Went to Showdown, WTSD. I love Went to Showdown, and again, for those that have sort of trickled in, my vision for this is that we'll talk about these, then we'll do one more layer of more intermediate stats, and then after we do that, we will hit the tables and practice what I've been preaching. So if you can hold that thought, Mr. Allen, we'll get to When to Showdown in round 2 of the stats. I think it is important, but the reason I'm going in this sequence, I want to emphasize this, is because you just got to make sure you've got thousands of hands on your opponents before you start using showdown stats, because you need a lot more hands. Whereas with these, I've shown you this technique, and I can't emphasize this enough, that you want to be checking out this pop-up while you're getting used to it, because we've got, like if I look at my 3-bet here, where's 3-bet? 3-bet, there it is, 18.2, okay, 33. So that tells me 80 hands. Yeah, my 3-bet's starting to get reliable, but not quite. Let's open another table. Let's get a new set of stats in front of our eyes. Divine Glory, what's happening, yo? Yeah, you've caught us amidst a Poker HUD lesson where we've built up this HUD from scratch, and now we're just talking about some tips and tricks on how to make the use of our Poker HUD. So this is nice because now we're getting into the hundreds, right? So before we had 80s and one guy at 650. Let's come over to this guy, Clowns. We've got 343 hands, so I can tell you from experience, his VPIP is good, his pre-flop, is reliable, his pre-flop raise is reliable, his 3-bet's reliable. Like, let's check. 3-bet is, and I'm just moving the mouse over, by the way. You can control that in the settings. You can make it a click if you don't want the mouse over, because you're always popping it up by accident, and you can actually make it a click instead of a mouse over. But this guy is notice that next to the 3-bet statistic, the 3.2. Hey, David. The 3.2 is, there's no number next to that, right? There's nothing in the parentheses, which tells us that we can fully rely on that statistic, okay? So I can say, great, 3.2. He has a very low 3-bet. When this guy 3-bets me, he's always got the goods, right? If I come over to this guy, this 54, and I see the 9%, and I look at that, and that's over 22. So, that's actually more 3-bets than opportunities than, I'm surprised. He's had a number of opportunities. What that kind of tells me is he's played at a fishy table. Like if he's had so many opportunities and 54 hands, that means that like half of them, a little less than half, were actually raised and he had an opportunity. Whereas this guy, like 343 hands, I don't know if you guys quite get this concept. Or where was it? Let's see, 119. Yeah, anyway, the point of that is around 100 is when you can start really relying on your 3-bet. If you're around 40 or something, then You know, unless it's an outlier where someone's opened they've 3-bet every single opportunity, or they've never 3-bet in every single opportunity, then look for about 100 hands for the 3-bet. Cold call is going to be similar. So we come to cold call, and this guy's cold call is 21% over 34 hands. And notice that there's 34 data points for cold call and 41 data points for 3-bet. You know, because it's essentially the same data point. You know, if someone opens, you can call, right? If someone opens, you can 3-bet. Complex koala. Hello, sir. Only Madman. What is CC? CC is cold call percentage. Cold call raise. So when someone opens in front of you, they raise first. You have three options. You can fold, you can call, you can raise, right? Or re-raise technically. So the CC is the statistic that describes all the times you call, your calling frequency versus an open. And the 3-bet, which you guys are probably more familiar with, is your 3-betting frequency versus an open.